The crystal champagne glass shattered against the marble floor of the chateau, sending shards across my feet as I watched my daughter Emily scrub blood from her knees with a dirty rag. I threw my own glass down and marched straight toward the man who dared call himself her husband. The look of terror that flashed across his face told me everything I needed to know about what would happen next. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up in this French nightmare, because trust me, the story of how an American woman from Ohio ended up plotting revenge in a mansion outside Lyon is worth every second of your time. 6 years. That's how long it had been since I'd seen my daughter Emily face to face. 6 years since she'd married Henri Dubois and moved to France to live with his prestigious family. 6 years of carefully worded emails that always seemed to arrive at odd hours. Phone calls that lasted exactly 3 minutes before she'd claim someone was calling her away. Video calls where she'd positioned the camera so precisely you'd think she was directing a movie. I'm Margaret Patterson, by the way, 62 years old and retired from 30 years of teaching high school English in Cleveland. I raised Emily as a single mother after her father decided that fatherhood wasn't compatible with his dreams of becoming a rock star. Spoiler alert, he never made it past playing dive bars in Toledo. The trip to France had been planned for months. Emily kept making excuses: renovation, Henri's work schedule, his mother's health issues, always something. But when my sister Carol died unexpectedly in March, leaving me a modest inheritance, I decided enough was enough. I bought the plane ticket without asking permission and sent Emily an email with my arrival details. Her response had been strange. "Mother, how wonderful. Henri's family is so excited to meet you. Please don't worry about hotels. We have plenty of space. Just remember that the Dubois family values privacy and discretion above all else." Privacy and discretion. Right. I should have known something was wrong when my daughter started using words like discretion in casual conversation. Emily had always been direct, sometimes brutally honest. The girl who once told her high school principal his toupee looked like a dead squirrel wasn't suddenly developing diplomatic language skills. The flight from Cleveland to Lyon was my first time leaving the United States. 14 hours of recycled air and airplane food, sitting next to a businessman who kept trying to explain cryptocurrency to me like I was some confused grandmother who'd never seen a computer. I resisted the urge to mention my master's degree in literature, or the fact that I'd been managing my own investment portfolio since before he was born. I'd imagined this reunion 1,000 times. Emily running down the steps of some charming French cottage, throwing her arms around me, laughing about how paranoid I'd been about her settling down in a foreign country. We'd drink wine, eat cheese, and she'd tell me all about her life as a successful expatriate wife. The reality was different. The Dubois Chateau sat on 50 acres outside Lyon, the kind of property that screamed old money and older secrets. Wrought iron gates, manicured gardens, gravel driveway that crunched expensively under the taxi's tires. Beautiful, intimidating, and somehow completely wrong for my daughter, who'd grown up in a 3-bedroom ranch house and considered Red Lobster fancy dining. Henri met me at the front door. Tall, thin, with the kind of sharp features that looked elegant in good lighting and cruel in shadows. His smile was practiced, perfect, and didn't reach his eyes. "Madam Patterson, what an honor to finally meet Emily's mare." His English was flawless, but carried an edge that made my skin crawl. "Emily is resting. The excitement of your visit has overwhelmed her delicate constitution." Delicate constitution? We were talking about the same girl who once played an entire soccer game with a sprained ankle because she refused to let her team down. Emily had never been delicate a day in her life. "I'd like to see her," I said, keeping my voice pleasant, while every instinct screamed that something was wrong. Of course. But first, allow me to show you to your quarters. The journey has been long, non? You must be exhausted." He led me through hallways lined with oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors, up a grand staircase that belonged in a museum, to a guest room that was larger than my entire living room back home. Everything was beautiful, expensive, and cold as a tomb. "Dinner is at 8 sharp, Henri informed me. "The family dresses for dinner. I trust you brought..." Appropriate attire? I looked down at my comfortable travel clothes and smiled sweetly. Don't worry about me, Henri. I clean up real nice. His expression suggested he doubted that considerably. After he left, I sat on the antique bed and tried to process the situation. This wasn't the life Emily had described in her emails. She'd written about simple pleasures, local markets, learning to cook French cuisine. She'd never mentioned servants, formal dinners, or guest rooms that looked like museum exhibits. At 7:30, I made my way downstairs wearing the nicest dress I'd packed, a simple black cocktail number that had served me well through parent-teacher conferences and retirement parties. Not exactly chateau formal, but it would have to do. I was following the sound of conversation toward what I assumed was the dining room when I rounded a corner and froze. There, on her hands and knees in an alcove I'd almost missed, was Emily. She was wearing a faded gray dress that hung loose on her too-thin frame, scrubbing the marble floor with a bucket of soapy water beside her. But it wasn't just the sight of my daughter on her knees that stopped me cold. It was the fresh cuts on her hands, the way she moved like every muscle ached, the careful way she avoided putting weight on her left wrist, and most telling of all, the way she looked up with absolute terror when footsteps approached, before recognizing me and quickly looking away. That's when Henri appeared behind me, carrying a crystal champagne glass, his face a mask of cool amusement. "Ah, Madame Patterson, you've discovered Emily's hobby. She finds manual labor therapeutic, something about staying connected to honest work." He took a sip of champagne and smiled as my daughter continued scrubbing, never looking up, her shoulders rigid with fear. That's when I knew three things with absolute certainty. My daughter wasn't a wife in this house. She was a prisoner. Henri Dubois was a monster who enjoyed her suffering. And before I left France, one way or another, I was going to destroy him. I grabbed Henri's wrist as he raised that champagne glass to his lips again, surprised by my own strength as I squeezed until he winced. "Where I come from, we have a saying about men who hurt women," I said in a voice that could freeze hell. "They don't stay standing very long." My fingers left white marks on his expensive silk sleeve before I released him and knelt beside Emily, whose whole body was trembling as she continued scrubbing the same spot over and over. "Sweetheart," I whispered, but she flinched away like I'd struck her. Henri's laugh was sharp, cutting through the tension like glass. "I see where Emily gets her dramatic tendencies. Madame Patterson, you misunderstand the situation entirely." "Oh, I understand perfectly." I stood up slowly, never taking my eyes off his face. "I understand that my daughter, who used to bench press 150 and could eat a whole pizza by herself, now looks like she hasn't had a decent meal in months. I understand that she's wearing a dress that belongs on a Downton Abbey extra, not a woman in the 21st century. And I definitely understand why she stopped video calling me 6 months ago." The color drained from Henri's face, but he recovered quickly. "Family dynamics in France are different from your American informality. Emily has embraced traditional values, finding purpose in domestic duties." "Traditional values?" I almost choked on the words. "Is that what you call treating your wife like unpaid help?" "Emily!" The sharp command came from the dining room entrance, delivered by a woman who could have been carved from ice. She had Henri's sharp features and the kind of bearing that suggested she'd never done a day's work in her life. "Continue with your duties. Our guest seems to have gotten lost." This had to be Marguerite Dubois, Henri's mother and apparent queen of this frozen castle. Emily immediately bent lower over her scrubbing, her movements desperate now. "Actually, I found exactly what I was looking for," I said, not moving from Emily's side. Marguerite glided closer, her silk gown rustling with each step. "Madame Patterson, I am Henri's mother. We are so pleased you could finally visit. I do hope you'll understand that our household maintains certain standards." Standards. I repeated the word like it tasted bad. "And those standards include having your daughter-in-law clean floors during dinner parties? Emily has chosen to contribute to the household in ways that suit her. Limited abilities. Limited abilities. My daughter, who'd graduated summa cum laude from Ohio State, who spoke 3 languages fluently, who'd been accepted to law school before she met this family of predators." "Limited abilities," I said slowly. "You mean like the ability to access her own passport? Or contact her family? Those kinds of limitations?" The silence that followed was deafening. Henri and his mother exchanged a look that confirmed everything I suspected. Emily hadn't been keeping me at arm's length by choice. She'd been isolated, controlled, probably threatened. "Perhaps," Marguerite said carefully, "we should discuss this over dinner. I'm sure there are many misunderstandings to clear up. The only thing I need cleared up is why my daughter looks terrified to make eye contact with me." Emily's scrub brush had stopped moving. She was listening to every word, her breathing shallow and quick. "Emily," I said gently, "look at me." She shook her head almost imperceptibly. "Emily." This time I put authority in my voice, the tone I'd used to command attention from rowdy teenagers for 3 decades. "Look at me." Slowly, painfully, she raised her head. What I saw in her eyes made my blood boil. Fear, yes, but also shame. My confident, fierce daughter was ashamed to let me see what they'd done to her. That's when I noticed the bruise along her jawline, carefully concealed with makeup, but visible now that I knew what to look for. The way she favored her left side. The careful way she moved her hands, like her wrists had been recently injured. "How long?" I asked her directly. "How long what?" Henry interrupted. "I wasn't talking to you." I didn't bother looking at him. "Emily, how long since you've been allowed to leave this property?" Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. She looked at Henry with pure terror. "Emily suffers from agoraphobia," Marguerite said smoothly. "She finds the outside world overwhelming. We provide her with a safe, structured environment." Agoraphobia. I almost laughed. "You mean the same Emily who backpacked through Europe for 3 months before college? The one who used to drive to Chicago just to try new restaurants?" "People change," Henry said coldly. "Yes, they do," I agreed. "Especially when they're being systematically broken down by people who get off on having power over them." The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. "I think," Marguerite said with forced calm, "you're overtired from your journey. Perhaps dinner and rest will help you see the situation more clearly." "Oh, I'm seeing everything very clearly." I reached down and helped Emily to her feet, feeling how fragile she'd become under my hands. "Emily, you're coming with me, right now." "She can't." Henry's voice was sharp with panic. She's not well. She needs her medication, her routine." "What medication?" I demanded. The silence stretched between us like a wire about to snap. "Emily takes medication for anxiety, depression, various conditions. Disrupting her care would be dangerous." I looked at my daughter's face, really looked at it, and saw what I'd missed before. The slightly glassy look in her eyes, the way her pupils seemed too small, the subtle tremor in her hands that I'd attributed to fear. They weren't just keeping her prisoner, they were drugging her. "What kind of medication, exactly?" I asked in a voice that could cut steel. Henri and Marguerite exchanged another look. In that look, I saw calculation, desperation, and something else. Something that told me I'd just stumbled onto something much worse than domestic abuse. "I think," I said slowly, "it's time Emily and I had a private conversation." "Impossible," Marguerite snapped. "Emily's condition requires constant supervision." "Then I guess it's a good thing I'm a trained crisis counselor," I lied smoothly. 30 years working with traumatized teenagers taught me a thing or two about recognizing when someone needs help. Emily's head snapped up at that, hope flickering in her drugged eyes for the first time since I'd arrived. Henri stepped forward, his mask of politeness finally slipping. "You will not disrupt this household with your American dramatics. Emily is my wife, my responsibility, and if you take one more step toward my daughter, I'm going to show you exactly how dramatic this American can get." We stared at each other across the marble floor, Emily swaying slightly between us, and I realized this was the moment everything changed. Whatever happened next would determine whether I walked out of this chateau with my daughter or left her here to disappear completely. But there was something Henri didn't know about me, something that would become very clear very soon. I hadn't raised a daughter alone, fought my way through graduate school working double shifts, and survived 30 years of dealing with entitled parents and administrative bureaucrats just to be intimidated by some French sociopath who got his kicks torturing women. The question wasn't whether I was going to get Emily out of here. The question was how much damage I was going to do to the Dubois family on my way out. "Emily, go pack a bag," I said, without taking my eyes off Henri. Right now. She will do no such thing, Marguerite hissed, but I could hear the uncertainty creeping into her voice. Emily started to move toward the stairs, then stopped, looking back at Henri with an expression that made my heart break. Even drugged, even terrified, she was still seeking permission from her captor. That's when I knew just how completely they'd broken her spirit. Emily, I said more gently, you don't need anyone's permission to pack your own clothes. Henri stepped between Emily and the staircase. This is ridiculous. Emily, tell your mother you're happy here. Tell her you chose this life. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily stood there, swaying slightly, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to remember how to speak for herself. Can't quite get the words out, can she? I observed. That's interesting, because my Emily always had plenty to say. Must be all that medication helping with her anxiety. Margaret? Emily's voice was barely a whisper, scratchy like she hadn't used it in months. Yes, baby? I want... She looked at Henri, then at me, then down at her hands. I can't. You can, I said firmly. Whatever they've told you, whatever they've done to make you think you can't, you can. You're Emily Patterson, and you've never backed down from anything in your life. Emily Dubois, Henri corrected sharply. And she suffers from severe anxiety disorder. Her mother is clearly disturbed, Emily. Look how she's upsetting you. But Emily wasn't looking at Henri anymore. She was staring at me with something that looked almost like recognition dawning in her clouded eyes. Mom, she whispered, and for the first time, she sounded like my daughter. I'm here, sweetheart. I'm here, and I'm not leaving without you. That's when Henri made his first real mistake. He grabbed Emily's arm, not gently, and yanked her back toward him. The sharp intake of breath she made, the way she automatically cowered, that told me everything about what her daily life looked like. Hands off my daughter. I enunciated each word clearly, stepping forward until I was close enough to see the panic starting to show through Henri's composed facade. Or what? He sneered. You'll call the police? This is France, madame. Emily is my wife, my legal responsibility. And you are an unwelcome guest who is now being asked to leave. I smiled. Not a nice smile. The smile I used to give parents who threatened to sue me for failing their precious snowflakes when they deserved it. You know what, Henri? You're absolutely right. This is France. And in France, just like in America, false imprisonment is a felony. So is administering controlled substances without prescription. And I'm betting that whatever you're giving my daughter to keep her compliant isn't exactly prescribed by a legitimate doctor. The color drained from both Henri's and Marguerite's faces. So here's what's going to happen, I continued. Emily is going upstairs to pack her things. I'm going to help her, and then we're leaving. You can either let that happen quietly, or you can explain to the French police why an American citizen has been held against her will and drugged into submission. You have no proof. I have 30 years of experience recognizing abuse victims. I have photos. I held up my phone, which I'd been discreetly using since I arrived. And I have Emily, who's going to testify about everything you've done to her once we get somewhere safe and let whatever drugs you've been feeding her work their way out of her system. Marguerite stepped forward, her composure finally cracking. You understand nothing about our family, our traditions. I understand that you're about to lose control of the situation entirely. I looked at her with all the contempt I could muster. Tell me, Marguerite, how many other women has this family destroyed? Because I'm guessing Emily isn't the first young woman to disappear into this mausoleum you call a home. The horrified look that flashed across Emily's face told me I'd hit closer to the truth than I'd intended. There were others, Emily whispered, so quietly I almost missed it. What did you say? I asked, but Henri was already moving. Enough! He lunged toward Emily, but I was faster. 30 years of breaking up high school fights had kept me in better shape than he'd expected. I caught his wrist and twisted it until he cried out. I said, hands off my daughter. Release me immediately. When you step away from Emily, not before. We stood frozen for a moment, him trying to pull away, me maintaining my grip, both of us breathing hard. That's when I heard it. Sirens in the distance, getting closer. Marguerite went white. Henri, what did you do? I didn't. He stopped struggling. I didn't call anyone. The sirens were definitely getting closer. Within minutes, blue lights were flashing through the chateau's windows. Well, this is interesting, I said, releasing Henri's wrist. Expecting company? The answer came in the form of rapid knocking on the front door, followed by authoritative voices shouting in French. Henri and Marguerite exchanged terrified looks. "Emily," I said urgently, "did you call someone? Did you find a way to get help?" She shook her head, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of hope, relief. The front door burst open without anyone going to answer it. 3 police officers entered, followed by a woman in a sharp business suit who carried herself like someone used to being in charge. "Madame Patterson?" the woman asked in accented but clear English. "I am Inspector Claire Rousseau. We received a call concerning the welfare of an American citizen." I looked at Emily, then at the inspector. "I didn't call anyone." "No," Inspector Rousseau agreed. "But someone did. 3 days ago, in fact. Someone who was very concerned about your safety when you came to visit your daughter. 3 days ago. That would have been right after I'd sent Emily the email with my arrival information. Someone had been monitoring her communications and realized I was coming. Who? I started to ask. Dr. Marie Dubois, the inspector continued. Henri's sister. She's been documenting what happens in this house for months, waiting for an opportunity to act. Henri's face went from pale to gray. Marie wouldn't. Your sister has been working with us for some time, Monsieur Dubois, building a case against you and your mother for trafficking, false imprisonment, and systematic abuse of young women. Madame Patterson's visit provided the perfect opportunity to intervene. Emily swayed on her feet, and I caught her before she could fall. "How many?" she whispered. "How many others?" Inspector Rousseau's expression softened as she looked at my daughter. "7 that we know of, madam. All foreign women who married into prominent French families and then disappeared from contact with their relatives. 7 other women. 7 other daughters, stolen from their families and turned into drugged servants for entitled monsters. Emily," I said softly, "it's over. It's all over." She looked up at me with tears streaming down her face, and for the first time in 6 years, I saw my real daughter looking back at me. "Are you going to be strong enough to help make sure they pay for this?" I asked her. Emily straightened her shoulders, and despite the drugs, despite the fear, despite everything they'd done to break her, I saw a flash of the fierce young woman who'd never backed down from a fight. "Mom," she said clearly, "I've been waiting for this moment for 3 years. That's when I realized my daughter hadn't just been surviving in this hell. She'd been enduring it, documenting it, and waiting for her chance to fight back. The question was, what had she discovered about the Dubois family that was about to bring their whole world crashing down? 3 years, I repeated, helping Emily steady herself against the wall as the police began handcuffing Henri and Marguerite. "Emily, what happened 3 years ago?" Her eyes were clearer now, as if the shock of seeing the police had burned away some of the drug haze. "That's when I found Isabel's diary." Inspector Rousseau stepped closer. "Madame Patterson, your daughter has been incredibly brave. She's been gathering evidence despite significant personal risk." "What kind of evidence?" I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know. Emily looked at Henri, who was shouting at the officers in rapid French, then back at me. "There's a room in the basement, a hidden room where they keep things, documents, photos, personal belongings from all the women who've been here." My blood went cold. Personal belongings? Driver's licenses, passports, jewelry, phones. Emily's voice grew stronger with each word, all confiscated from women who were told they were being kept safe from their own mental instability. I thought about Henri's claims of Emily's agoraphobia, her need for medication and supervision. It wasn't random cruelty, it was a practiced system. The Dubois family has been perfecting this for generations, Inspector Rousseau explained. They target young foreign women who marry into wealthy French families, gradually isolate them, claim they're mentally unstable, obtain legal guardianship, and then what? I demanded. Some disappear entirely. Others, like Emily, become permanent staff, unpaid labor for the household, completely cut off from the outside world. Emily pulled something from the waistband of her gray dress. A small recording device, no bigger than a thumb drive. "I've been recording everything for 2 years. Every conversation, every threat, every time they discussed what happened to the women who came before me." I stared at my daughter with new respect. She hadn't just been surviving, she'd been conducting an undercover investigation. That's why the video calls were always so short and strange, I realized. You were trying to send me signals. The background music, Emily nodded. I always played our song, the one you sang to me when I was little. I hoped you'd remember and realize something was wrong. Scarborough Fair. The melody came back to me instantly. She'd played it during every single video call, and I'd thought it was just background noise. Emily, I'm so sorry I didn't— You came, she said firmly. That's all that matters. Henri had stopped shouting at the police and was now staring at Emily with a mixture of rage and disbelief. You little— Careful, I warned him. I'm feeling a lot less civilized than I was 20 minutes ago. Inspector Rousseau consulted her phone. Madam Patterson, there are some things you need to know about what your daughter uncovered. The evidence she gathered connects the Dubois family to an international trafficking network. Trafficking? The word hit me like a physical blow. Not sex trafficking, Emily said quietly. Labor trafficking. They identify vulnerable women, usually foreigners marrying into wealthy families, and gradually strip away their identities, their connections, their legal rights. They become property. I felt sick. How many families are involved? That's what we're still determining, Inspector Rousseau said. Your daughter's evidence suggests it's larger than we initially thought. Families across France, some in Italy and Spain as well. Emily reached into another pocket and pulled out a flash drive. This contains copies of everything: financial records, correspondence between families, lists of women and their status. Status? I asked. Active, relocated, or deceased, Emily said matter-of-factly, though I could see the trauma beneath her composure. The casual way she said deceased made my knees weak. You mean the women who fought back too hard, or who were discovered trying to escape, or who became too physically ill to work effectively. They had accidents. I looked at Henri, who was now refusing to make eye contact with anyone. You sick bastard, how many women did you kill? I never killed anyone, he said quickly. We never— Shut up, Marguerite snapped at her son. Don't say another word. But Henri was panicking now. It was never supposed to go that far. We just needed workers, people who couldn't leave or complain. Mother said it was a family tradition, that grandfather did the same thing. Henri! Marguerite's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Inspector Rousseau smiled grimly. Thank you for that confession. Monsieur Dubois, it will be very useful in court. Emily leaned heavily against me. Mom, I need to tell you something else. Something I haven't told the police yet. What is it, sweetheart? She looked around at the officers, then pulled me aside. There's one woman still here, still alive. They've kept her in the basement for 4 years. My heart stopped. What? Her name is Katrina. She's from Germany. They told her family she died in a car accident, but she's been here the whole time. She's not well. I looked at Inspector Rousseau, who had moved closer to hear our conversation. Inspector, there's another victim in the basement. The inspector immediately began barking orders in French. Within minutes, officers were heading toward what I assumed was the basement entrance. Emily, I said urgently, are there others? Other women still alive? I think so. The recordings mention safe houses, other properties, but I never saw them myself. Inspector Rousseau returned to us. Madame Patterson, I need to ask you and Emily to come to the station for debriefing. This case is going to be much larger than we anticipated. I nodded, then looked back at Henri and Marguerite, who were being led away in handcuffs. For months they'd made Emily feel powerless, broken, less than human. But they'd underestimated something fundamental about my daughter. She was a Patterson, and Pattersons don't break. We bend until we can snap back hard enough to destroy whatever tried to destroy us. Emily, I said, I need you to know something. I'm proud of you, not just for surviving this, but for turning yourself into the weapon that's going to bring down this whole network. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. I just want to go home, Mom. We will, sweetheart. But first, we're going to make sure every single one of these families pays for what they've done. And we're going to find every woman they're still holding. As we walked out of the chateau, Emily leaning on my arm but growing stronger with each step, I realized this wasn't just about saving my daughter anymore. It was about saving dozens of other daughters, wives, sisters who were trapped in similar hells across Europe. Henri had made one fatal mistake when he decided to target my family. He'd assumed I was just another worried mother who could be intimidated into silence. He was about to learn exactly how wrong that assumption was, because Margaret Patterson had just declared war on an international trafficking network, and I intended to win. The French police station at 2 a.m. was a different world. Harsh fluorescent lights, the smell of strong coffee, and the constant buzz of activity as Inspector Rousseau's team worked to unravel what they were now calling Operation Scarborough. Emily had chosen the code name herself, after the song that had been her silent cry for help. "Madame Patterson," Inspector Rousseau said, setting down a cup of coffee in front of me. "We found Katrina alive, but barely. She's been sedated for so long she can barely remember her own name." Emily gripped my hand tighter. She'd insisted on staying for the full debriefing, despite the doctor's recommendations that she rest while the drugs worked their way out of her system. "How many properties are we talking about?" I asked. Based on Emily's recordings and the documents she photographed, at least 15 estates across France, 3 in Italy, and 2 in Spain, all connected through marriage alliances between wealthy families. I felt dizzy. Marriage alliances. You mean this isn't just the Dubois family? It's organized crime disguised as high society. Exactly. They've been operating for decades, possibly longer. Young women meet charming men from prestigious families, fall in love, marry quickly, and then disappear from their former lives. Their families are told they've chosen privacy, become reclusive, sometimes that they've died in accidents. Emily spoke up, her voice steadier now. "They showed me photographs of the others, before and after pictures. You could see how they broke them down systematically." "The medication," I said. What were they giving you?" "A combination of sedatives and mood stabilizers adjusted based on how compliant I was. When I started acting too independent or asking too many questions, the doses increased." Inspector Rousseau consulted her notes. "We found pharmaceutical records in Henri's office. They've been working with corrupt doctors to obtain legitimate prescriptions for non-existent conditions." I thought about Emily's transformation from the confident young woman I'd raised to the terrified shell I'd found scrubbing floors. How long does something like that take? To break someone down completely? "It depends on the person," Emily said quietly. "Some women gave up after a few months. Others fought for years before they stopped fighting. But you never stopped." She looked at me with something that might have been pride. "You taught me never to give up, Mom. Even when I wanted to die, even when it seemed hopeless, I kept thinking about what you'd do if you were in my place. What I'd do is exactly what you did. Gather evidence and wait for the right moment to strike back." Inspector Rousseau leaned forward. "Emily, the recordings you made are extraordinary evidence, but we need to know, are you willing to testify? To help us prosecute not just Henri and Marguerite, but the entire network?" Emily was quiet for a long moment. I could see her weighing the cost of reliving her trauma against the importance of stopping other women from suffering the same fate. "How many women could we save?" she asked. "If we can prove the full scope of this network, potentially dozens who are currently trapped and hundreds more who could become victims in the future." "Then yes," Emily said firmly. "I'll testify." I squeezed her hand. "You don't have to decide right now. Sweetheart, you've been through enough. Mom, I've been planning this moment for 2 years. I've imagined exactly what I'd say in court, how I'd describe what they did to me and to the others. I'm not backing down now." Inspector Rousseau smiled. "Your daughter is remarkable, Madame Patterson. Her evidence has already led to arrests in 3 other countries. Interpol is coordinating the investigation now. What about the women who are still trapped? Rescue operations begin at dawn. Teams are moving on all known properties simultaneously to prevent evidence destruction or victim relocation." I felt a surge of satisfaction thinking about families like the Dubois waking up to find their world crumbling around them. Good. They deserve to lose everything. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Unknown international number. Your daughter is very brave, Madame Patterson. But bravery can be dangerous when it threatens powerful people. Some battles cannot be won by ordinary citizens." I showed the message to Inspector Rousseau, whose expression immediately became grim. "They're trying to intimidate you," she said. "This confirms that the network extends beyond what we've uncovered so far." "Let them try," I said, deleting the message. "I've spent 30 years dealing with bullies. The only thing that's changed is the stakes." Emily looked at the phone, then at me. "Mom, there's something else I haven't told you. about why they kept me alive when other women who fought back were removed. The room went quiet. "What is it, Emily?" She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small key. "Because I found their insurance policy, bank account numbers, legal documents, video recordings of their business partners discussing the operation. They kept me alive because they knew if anything happened to me, you'd come looking, and I'd hidden evidence that would destroy not just them, but their entire network." I stared at my daughter with amazement. "You set up a dead man's switch. If I disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances, everything would automatically be released to law enforcement agencies worldwide." Inspector Rousseau was taking rapid notes. "Where is this evidence?" "Safe deposit box in Geneva. The key only works in combination with my fingerprint and a password that changes weekly. If I miss 2 consecutive password updates, everything gets released automatically." The inspector looked at Emily with something approaching awe. "You've been planning this for years." "I've been planning this since the day I realized I wasn't the first woman they'd trapped, and I swore I'd be the last." My phone buzzed again. Another message from the same number. "Clever girl. But cleverness only protects you if you're smarter than everyone who wants you dead. Geneva is closer than you think." I showed the message to Inspector Rousseau, who immediately began making calls in rapid French. "They know about the evidence," Emily said calmly, "which means they have someone inside the investigation, or they've been monitoring our communications. Emily, we need to get you somewhere safe immediately." "No," she said firmly. "We need to go to Geneva and retrieve that evidence before they do. Because if they get to it first, dozens of women die, and this whole network disappears underground for another generation." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and realized that sometime in the last 3 years of hell, she'd stopped being the young woman who needed my protection and became someone who was prepared to fight a war. "Inspector Rousseau," I said, "how quickly can we get to Geneva?" "Madame, it's too dangerous." "How quickly?" She checked her watch. 3 hours by helicopter. "But the risks to Emily if we don't go are worse than the risks if we do," I interrupted. "Besides, they're not just threatening my daughter anymore. They're threatening me. And that was their second fatal mistake." Emily looked at me with curiosity. "What was their first mistake?" I smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. "They assumed they were dealing with ordinary people. They had no idea they'd kidnapped the daughter of a woman who spent 30 years preparing teenagers for a hostile world. And now they're about to find out what happens when you threaten a Patterson family." As we prepared to leave for Geneva, with Emily's evidence and Inspector Rousseau's team coordinating an international takedown, I realized this was no longer just about rescuing my daughter. This was about dismantling an entire network of predators who'd been destroying women's lives for generations. They wanted a war. They were about to get one. But there was something else, something in the way Emily had described the evidence, that told me we were walking into a trap. The question was whether we were clever enough to turn it around on them before they managed to silence both of us permanently. The real battle was just beginning. The helicopter ride to Geneva should have been terrifying, but honestly, after finding your daughter being tortured by French aristocrats, a bumpy flight in a police chopper felt like a relaxing Sunday drive. Emily sat across from me, more alert than she'd been in years, studying satellite photos of the Swiss bank where her evidence was stored. "Mom," she said, pointing to the building layout, "there's something I need to tell you about the evidence." Inspector Rousseau, who was coordinating with Swiss authorities through her headset, paused to listen. "The safety deposit box isn't just insurance," Emily continued. "It's bait. I made sure whoever's running this network would find out about it eventually." I stared at my daughter. "You set a trap." "I set multiple traps. The Geneva box contains real evidence, but it also contains tracking devices linked to accounts I created under false names. Anyone who accesses that evidence will trigger alerts that will lead us to the real power behind this operation." "Emily, that's brilliant and terrifying. What if they kill you instead of trying to get the evidence?" She smiled grimly. "That's where the dead man's switch comes in. If anything happens to me, everything gets released automatically. But if they try to access the Geneva evidence themselves, we get to trace them back to their source." Inspector Rousseau finished her call and turned to us. "Swiss police have the bank surrounded, but there's a problem. Someone accessed the building 40 minutes ago using legitimate credentials. Legitimate how? I demanded. Bank executive authorization. Someone with high-level access opened the vault before we arrived. Emily cursed under her breath. They have someone inside the Swiss banking system. That means this network goes deeper than just traffickers. They've infiltrated major financial institutions. The helicopter began its descent toward Geneva. Through the windows, I could see police cars surrounding what looked like a modest office building. Nothing about it screamed International Criminal Evidence Storage, which I supposed was the point. Whatever happens in there, I told Emily, stay behind me. Mom, with all due respect, I've been fighting these people a lot longer than you have, and I've been protecting you a lot longer than you've been fighting anything. Old habits. We landed in a secure area near the bank. Swiss police immediately surrounded us as we disembarked, their efficiency impressive, but somehow less intimidating than Henri's cold smile. Inspector Rousseau led us toward the building entrance. The person who accessed your safety deposit box is still inside, she reported. Security cameras show a woman, approximately 50 years old, well-dressed, professional appearance. She's been in the vault for 35 minutes. 35 minutes to examine evidence that should take hours to properly review, Emily observed. She's not studying it, she's copying it or destroying it. Or she's waiting for us, I added. The bank manager met us at the entrance, visibly nervous. Officers, this is highly irregular. The person who accessed Box 847 had proper authorization, all paperwork in order. What name was on the authorization? Inspector Rousseau demanded. The manager consulted his tablet. Dr. Marie Dubois. Emily and I exchanged looks. Henri's sister? The one who supposedly contacted police about me? Inspector Rousseau's expression darkened. That's impossible. Dr. Marie Dubois died in a car accident 3 months ago. The pieces clicked together in my mind with horrible clarity. Someone's been using her identity since she died. Someone who had access to her credentials, her authorization codes. Someone who killed her when she started cooperating with police, Emily finished. We were walking into a trap, but not the kind Emily had set. This was a trap set by whoever was really running the network, using a dead woman's identity to lure us into a confrontation. We should wait for backup, Inspector Rousseau said, but I was already moving toward the elevator. Backup isn't going to help if whoever's down there decides to destroy the evidence and disappear, I said. Emily, give me the key. Mom, no. If something happens to you, if something happens to me, you still have the dead man's switch. But if something happens to you, those women stay trapped forever. She hesitated, then pressed the key into my hand. The password is Scarborough Fair 2024, followed by today's date. I kissed her forehead. Stay here with Inspector Rousseau, and if I'm not back in 20 minutes, trigger the dead man's switch and release everything. The elevator ride to the vault level felt like descending into the underworld. When the doors opened, I found myself in a sterile corridor lined with security cameras. At the far end, the vault door stood open, light spilling out into the hallway. I walked toward it slowly, every instinct screaming that this was a mistake, but knowing I didn't have a choice. Emily's evidence was the only thing standing between dozens of women and continued torture. Madame Patterson, a cultured voice called from inside the vault. Please join me. We have so much to discuss. I stepped into the vault and found myself face to face with a woman who could have been anyone's elegant grandmother. Silver hair, perfectly styled, expensive clothes, kind eyes behind designer glasses. She was sitting calmly at a small table, Emily's evidence spread out in front of her. I'm sorry for the deception about Marie Dubois, she said pleasantly, but I needed to ensure you came here personally. Who are you? My name is Catherine Beaumont. I've been coordinating family placements for 37 years. Family placements. Such a civilized term for human trafficking. You're the one running this network. Running is too strong a word. I prefer to think of myself as a facilitator. Wealthy families need domestic staff they can trust completely. Young women need security and purpose. I simply bring them together. I stared at this woman who spoke about enslaving people like she was running a high-end employment agency. By drugging them and stripping away their identities, by providing them with structure and meaning, many of these women were lost, searching for purpose in their lives. We give them that purpose. You destroy their lives. Catherine smiled. and it was the most chilling expression I'd ever seen. "Madame Patterson, I've reviewed your daughter's evidence very carefully. It's quite thorough. Too thorough, in fact." "Good. That means when it's released, your entire network gets destroyed. Actually, it means your daughter has been too clever for her own good. You see, the evidence she gathered doesn't just implicate the families we work with. It also contains detailed information about our financial networks, our governmental contacts, our international connections." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. So there are people much more powerful than the Dubois family who have significant investments in keeping this operation running smoothly. People who cannot allow this evidence to see daylight. "Are you threatening me?" Catherine stood up slowly. "I'm explaining reality. Your daughter's dead. Man's switch is very clever, but it only triggers if something happens to her. It says nothing about what happens to the dozens of women currently in our care if this evidence is released." "What do you mean?" "I mean that if Emily's evidence goes public, those women become liabilities instead of assets. And we have very efficient ways of dealing with liabilities." The threat was clear. If we exposed the network, they'd murder every woman they were holding to eliminate witnesses. "You're bluffing." Catherine pulled out a phone and showed me a live video feed. On the screen, I could see women in gray dresses similar to what Emily had been wearing, standing in what looked like a warehouse basement. There had to be at least 20 of them. "This is just one location," Catherine said calmly. "We have 6 facilities across Europe. At my signal, all of these women can be eliminated within minutes." I felt sick. Emily's careful plan to expose the network could end up getting dozens of innocent women killed. "What do you want?" "Your daughter continues her married life with Henri. The evidence remains sealed, and you return to America with the understanding that any attempt to contact authorities will result in immediate consequences for everyone involved. You want us to just walk away and let this continue. I want you to understand that some battles cannot be won by ordinary people, no matter how determined they are." I looked at the evidence spread across the table. Photos, documents, recordings that could destroy an international criminal network. Then I looked at the phone showing terrified women who would die if I tried to use that evidence. "I need time to think." "You have 5 minutes. After that, I leave with this evidence, and your daughter's protection disappears permanently." Catherine checked her expensive watch and sat back down, completely calm, as if we were negotiating a business contract instead of the lives of dozens of women. But she'd made a crucial mistake in bringing me down here alone. She'd assumed that Margaret Patterson was just another worried mother who could be intimidated into compliance. She had no idea that for the past 3 years, while Emily was gathering evidence, I'd been doing some research of my own. Research that was about to turn this negotiation completely upside down. "Before I give you an answer," I said, settling into the chair across from Catherine, "I have a question about your operation." She looked mildly amused. "You're hardly in a position to conduct interviews, Madame Patterson." "Humor me. It's been bothering me since I arrived in France. How do you maintain control over so many families across multiple countries? The logistics alone must be incredibly complex." Catherine's expression shifted slightly. She was proud of her work, which meant she wanted to explain it. Classic mistake. Ego over caution. "It's not as difficult as you might think. We work with established families who understand the value of discretion. Families with political connections, judicial influence, financial leverage. Like the Dubois family. The Dubois family is middle management at best. The real power lies with people who can make entire investigations disappear, who can influence legislation, who control major financial institutions." I nodded thoughtfully, as if I was genuinely curious rather than buying time. "And these powerful people? They're all men, I assume." Catherine laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "Oh, my dear, you really don't understand how this works, do you? Some of our most valuable partners are women. Women who understand that power requires sacrifice, that some people are simply meant to serve. Women like you, women like me, built this network. We identified the need, developed the methods, established the connections. The men simply provide the muscle and the legal protection." She was giving me everything I needed, confirming what I'd suspected since the helicopter ride. This wasn't just human trafficking. It was a sophisticated network that had infiltrated governments, banks, and judicial systems across Europe. Impressive, I said. But I'm curious about something else. How do you handle resistance when families start asking too many questions about missing relatives? Usually, the families are told their daughters chose isolation or died in accidents. We have extensive networks of corrupt officials who can provide falsified death certificates, accident reports, whatever documentation is needed. Like what happened to Marie Dubois. Catherine's smile faltered slightly. Marie became problematic. She started asking questions about Emily's situation, threatening to contact authorities. So you killed her and stole her identity. We eliminated a threat to our operation. Her credentials provided useful access to banking systems and police databases. I checked my watch. 2 minutes had passed. One more question. The women you're holding now, the ones in that warehouse, how many facilities are there really? 6, as I said. Why? Because, I said, standing up slowly. That's not enough. Catherine frowned. Not enough for what? I pulled out my phone and showed her a video feed of my own. On the screen were dozens of police officers and rescue teams surrounding buildings in what appeared to be multiple locations. Not enough to hold all the women Inspector Rousseau's teams are rescuing right now. The color drained from Catherine's face. That's impossible. You couldn't have... While Emily was gathering evidence against individual families, I was doing research of my own. Did you really think a woman who spent 30 years outmaneuvering parents, administrators, and school boards wouldn't recognize a shell company when she saw one? I showed her another screen on my phone. These are the real financial records I've been tracking for 3 years. Every property purchase, every suspicious death certificate, every bank transfer linked to your network. Catherine was staring at my phone like it contained a live snake. You're bluffing. You couldn't have accessed... Remember, Catherine, I raised a daughter who became an expert at undercover investigation. You think I didn't learn a few things myself? The truth was, I'd been terrified for Emily since our first strange video call 3 years ago. I'd started researching the Dubois family, their finances, their connections. What I'd found had led me down a rabbit hole of shell companies, suspicious financial transfers, and patterns that screamed organized crime. I'd been building a case against them for years, just waiting for an opportunity to act. The women in that warehouse feed you showed me, I continued. They're not there anymore. Swiss police raided all 6 facilities 30 minutes ago, guided by the financial trail I've been mapping since 2021. Catherine lunged for her phone, presumably to warn someone, but I was faster. 30 years of confiscating cell phones from teenagers had given me excellent reflexes. The real question, I said, pocketing her phone, is whether you want to cooperate with authorities or go down with your network. You don't understand the scope of what you're destroying, Catherine said, her composure finally cracking. The people we work with, they'll never let this stand. They have too much to lose. Good. I'm looking forward to meeting them. My phone buzzed with a text from Inspector Rousseau. All facilities secured. 47 women rescued. Teams moving on secondary targets now. I showed Catherine the message. 47 women, Catherine. 47 daughters, sisters, wives who are going home to their families because my daughter was brave enough to gather evidence, and I was stubborn enough to follow the money trail. Catherine stood up slowly, her elegant facade completely gone. You have no idea what you've started. Actually, I know exactly what I've started. I've started a war against people who profit from destroying women's lives. And unlike you, I don't plan to lose. The vault door behind me opened, and Inspector Rousseau entered with 2 Swiss police officers. Madam Patterson, are you all right? I'm fine, but Catherine here has been very helpful in explaining how her network operates. I believe she's ready to discuss cooperation in exchange for more lenient sentencing. Catherine looked between me and the officers, calculating her options. If I cooperate, what guarantees do I have? The same guarantee you gave those 47 women, I said. None whatsoever. As the Swiss police handcuffed Catherine, she looked at me with something that might have been respect. You're not what I expected, Madam Patterson. No, I agreed. I'm much worse than what you expected. I'm a mother who spent 3 years preparing for this moment. Inspector Rousseau secured Emily's evidence while the officers led Catherine away. Madam Patterson, what you've accomplished here. coordinating international law enforcement, tracking financial networks, gathering evidence across multiple jurisdictions. It's extraordinary work. It's what any mother would do for her daughter. Actually, it's what very few people could do. Have you considered a career in international investigation? I laughed for the first time in days. Inspector, I'm 62 years old, and I just want to take my daughter home to Ohio. Of course. But the network Catherine described, the governmental and financial connections, dismantling all of that will require ongoing investigation. I looked at the evidence Emily had gathered, then at the financial trail I'd been following for years. Together, they painted a picture of corruption that extended far beyond a few wealthy families trafficking women. How many more women do you think are still trapped? I asked. Based on what we've learned today? Potentially hundreds. I thought about Emily, finally safe upstairs, and all the other daughters who were still living in gray dresses, scrubbing floors, being slowly broken down by monsters who called it tradition. Inspector, I said finally, maybe I'm not quite ready to retire after all. Because Catherine had been right about one thing. Some battles couldn't be won by ordinary people. But the thing she'd failed to understand was that Margaret Patterson had stopped being ordinary the moment she decided to save her daughter. And now that Emily was safe, I was ready to save everyone else. 3 months later, I was sitting in a conference room at Interpol headquarters in Lyon, surrounded by computer screens, evidence files, and coffee cups that had seen better days. My temporary consultant badge read, M. Patterson, Financial Crimes Analysis, which made me smile every time I saw it. Margaret, we have a problem, Agent Sophia Martinez said, entering with a stack of new files. Sophia was the Interpol liaison I'd been working with to trace the financial networks behind what the media had started calling the European domestic trafficking ring. What kind of problem? The kind that involves your daughter. I looked up from the bank records I'd been analyzing. Emily's been in protective custody in Ohio for 2 months. How could there be a problem? Sophia set down a photograph. It showed Emily sitting in what appeared to be a cafe, talking to a well-dressed man with silver hair. The timestamp indicated the photo was taken yesterday. Emily left protective custody 3 days ago. She told the U.S. Marshals she needed to visit her grandmother's grave in Michigan. My mother is buried in Ohio, not Michigan, and Emily knows I'd never authorize her to leave protection. I studied the photograph more closely. Who's the man she's with? We don't know. But the photo was taken in Vienna, Austria, not Michigan. I felt that familiar chill of fear mixed with pride. Emily was investigating again, but this time she was doing it without backup, without coordination, and without telling me. Sophia, I need to call Emily right now. We've tried. Her phone goes straight to voicemail, and the number she gave the marshals is disconnected. I stood up, my mind already shifting into crisis mode. She found something that made her think she needed to act immediately. What could be that urgent? I thought about the evidence we'd been analyzing, the financial networks we'd been mapping, the governmental connections we'd been uncovering. We've been assuming that arresting Catherine and the Dubois family would dismantle the trafficking network. But what if we only got the middle management? Sophia nodded grimly. Our analysis suggests the network extends much higher than we initially thought. There are connections to banking executives, government ministers, possibly even EU officials. Then Emily might have found evidence pointing to the people who were really running the operation, people who would kill her rather than risk exposure. My phone rang. Unknown international number. Answer it, Sophia said, gesturing to the agents monitoring our communications. Hello? Hello, Mama. Emily's voice was calm, controlled, but I could hear the tension underneath. Emily, where are you? And don't lie to me, I know you're in Vienna. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you, but there wasn't time. I found something in the Geneva evidence that didn't make sense until 3 days ago. What kind of something? Remember the bank account numbers Catherine mentioned? The ones connected to the governmental contacts? Yes. I've been monitoring those accounts from Ohio. 3 days ago, there was massive activity, funds being transferred, accounts being closed, digital trails being erased. I felt my stomach drop. They're cleaning house. Exactly. Someone is systematically eliminating evidence of their involvement. But they made a mistake. What kind of mistake? They transferred too much money too quickly through a bank that requires physical authorization for transactions over 50 million euros. Sophia was taking notes rapidly while other agents traced the call. Emily, that's wonderful detective work. But you should have called us before going to Vienna. Mom, the authorization had to happen today. If I'd waited for official channels, the opportunity would have been lost forever. What opportunity? The chance to identify who's really running this network. The person who authorized those transfers is here, in Vienna, right now, and I'm about to meet with them. Emily, no, that's too dangerous. Mom, listen to me. I'm not the same woman they broke down 3 years ago. I know exactly what I'm doing. And what exactly are you doing? I'm finishing what we started. This network has been operating for decades because the people at the top have always remained invisible. Today, that changes. The line went quiet for a moment. I could hear background noise, traffic, people talking, what sounded like classical music. Emily, where are you right now? The Vienna Opera House. There's a gala tonight for European Banking Association board members. Very exclusive, very high profile. The kind of event where powerful people feel safe to conduct private business. Sophia was now frantically coordinating with Austrian authorities, while I tried not to panic about my daughter walking into a room full of potential criminals. Emily, please wait for backup. We can have Austrian police there in... Mom, the person I'm meeting thinks I'm Catherine Beaumont's replacement. They think I'm here to discuss continuing the trafficking operation under new management. I almost dropped the phone. You're going undercover? Emily, that's insane. It's the only way to get them to incriminate themselves. And I have insurance. What kind of insurance? The same kind I used in France. Everything I do tonight is being recorded and automatically uploaded to multiple secure servers. If anything happens to me, the evidence goes public immediately. Sophia handed me a note. Austrian police en route. 20 minutes to Opera House. Emily, Austrian police will be there in 20 minutes. Can you delay the meeting? Actually, Mom, I need to go. They're expecting me in the private box in 5 minutes. But don't worry. I learned from the best. What does that mean? It means I'm about to show these people what happens when they underestimate a Patterson woman. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, torn between terror and pride. Emily was walking into a room with people who could make her disappear permanently, but she was doing it with the same careful preparation and iron determination that I'd used to prepare for this investigation. Sophia, I need to be on the next flight to Vienna. Margaret, by the time I get there, my daughter will either have single-handedly exposed an international criminal conspiracy or she'll need someone to identify her body. Sophia looked at me with understanding. Actually, there's a helicopter waiting on the roof. We can be in Vienna in 90 minutes. Then let's go. As we headed for the roof, I realized that Emily had inherited more than just my stubbornness. She'd inherited my understanding that sometimes the only way to win against powerful enemies was to walk directly into their stronghold and force them to show their true faces. The question was whether she was as prepared for what she might find as she thought she was. Because the people who had run this network for decades didn't maintain their power by being careless or merciful. And if Emily had miscalculated, the next few hours would determine whether the Patterson family won this war or became its final casualties. The Vienna Opera House glittered like a jewel against the night sky as our helicopter circled for landing. Through my headset, I could hear Austrian police coordinating with building security, but I knew they were already too late. Emily had been inside for over an hour, and whatever she'd planned was already in motion. Margaret, Sophia said over the radio, we're getting reports of unusual activity in the Opera House. Private security has been doubled, and several board members left early. That's either very good news or very bad news. Given your daughter's track record, I'm hoping for very good news. We landed in a secured area behind the Opera House. Austrian police immediately surrounded us, their leader briefing Sophia in rapid German while I checked my phone obsessively. No messages from Emily, no missed calls, nothing. Inspector Klaus Müller, the Austrian officer, introduced himself in accented English. Your daughter is, how you say, very impressive. What do you mean? She has been wearing a wire for our investigation. For the past hour, we have recorded detailed confessions from 5 board members of the European Banking Association regarding their involvement in money laundering, human trafficking, and corruption of government officials. I felt a wave of relief so strong I nearly sat down. She's okay? She is better than okay. She is, what is the word? Magnificent. She has convinced these men that she represents a new organization taking over trafficking operations, and they are fighting each other to form partnerships with her. Sophia was grinning. Your daughter just got some of the most powerful men in European finance to confess to decades of criminal activity on tape. But there's a problem, Inspector Mueller continued. 20 minutes ago, someone arrived who was not on our list. Someone who knew Catherine Beaumont personally and immediately realized your daughter was not who she claimed to be. The relief evaporated. Who? Jean-Claude Moreau, member of the European Parliament, and, according to what we have just learned, the person who originally organized this network 40 years ago. Where is Emily now? Private Box 12? With Moreau and 3 other men. She activated her panic signal 15 minutes ago, but we cannot intervene without endangering her life. I looked toward the Opera House, its elegant facade hiding a confrontation that would determine whether decades of criminal activity finally came to light or disappeared forever. Can you get me inside? Margaret, no, Sophia said immediately. It's too dangerous. Emily went in there alone to finish what we started. I'm not leaving her to face this by herself. Inspector Mueller hesitated. There may be a way. Service corridors behind the private boxes. You could reach her location. But I'd be walking into a room with at least 4 men who have killed to protect their secrets. Yes, I thought about Emily. Probably terrified, but still fighting. Still gathering evidence, even as her cover was blown. I thought about the 47 women we'd rescued 3 months ago, and the hundreds more who might still be trapped if this network survived. Get me inside. 20 minutes later, I was crawling through a service corridor that smelled of dust and old wood, wearing a wire of my own and carrying a backup recording device that Sophia had insisted on. The corridor ran directly behind the private boxes, with access panels that allowed maintenance workers to reach electrical and sound systems. Through my earpiece, I could hear Emily's voice, still calm despite the circumstances. Monsieur Moreau, I understand your skepticism, but I assure you my organization has the resources and connections to maintain operations at their current scale. Mademoiselle, came a gravelly voice with a thick French accent. I knew Catherine Beaumont for 15 years. She would never have chosen a replacement so young. Perhaps she recognized the need for fresh perspectives in a changing world. I reached the access panel behind Box 12 and carefully opened it, providing a view into the private box through a decorative grate. What I saw made my blood boil. Emily was sitting calmly in a chair, surrounded by 4 men in expensive tuxedos. One of them, presumably Moreau, was holding a gun casually in his lap, not pointed at Emily, but clearly visible as a threat. The truth is, Moreau continued, Catherine contacted me 3 days before her arrest. She mentioned no succession plan, no replacement organization, which means you are either police, intelligence, or someone else with agenda we do not appreciate. Emily's composure never wavered. What I am is someone who understands that your network is about to collapse unless it adapts quickly. The arrests in France were just the beginning. Exactly, which is why we are consolidating our operations, eliminating loose ends. The threat was clear. Emily wasn't just blown, she was about to be murdered. That's when I realized something that changed everything. Through the grate, I could see Emily's hands, and she was making subtle gestures that I recognized. Sign language letters we'd learned together when she was 12 and wanted to communicate secretly during school events. FIREEXIT BEHIND She knew I was there. Somehow she'd figured out that I was in the building and positioned myself to help her. MOREAUGUNLAP. I could see that. What I needed was a plan to get her out of there safely. Then Emily did something extraordinary. She stood up slowly, as if stretching, and walked toward the window overlooking the main theater. As she moved, she continued talking. Gentlemen, before we discuss partnership terms, perhaps you'd like to know exactly what evidence has been gathered against your operations over the past 3 years. What evidence? Moreau demanded, his gun now pointing directly at Emily. The evidence that's been streaming live to international law enforcement agencies for the past 90 minutes. The room went silent. That's impossible, one of the other men said. We checked you for recording devices. Emily smiled, and it was the same fearless smile she'd worn at age 5 when she'd decided to climb the highest tree in our neighborhood. You checked me for traditional recording devices. You didn't check for the ones built into my clothing, my jewelry, and my medical devices. Medical devices? Moreau stood up, his gun trained on Emily. The pacemaker I've had since my captivity damaged my heart. It's been transmitting everything you've said directly to Interpol headquarters. I stared at my daughter through the grate. She didn't have a pacemaker. She was lying, buying time, hoping backup would arrive before they decided to kill her. But Emily wasn't just buying time. She was forcing them to reveal the full scope of their criminal network on tape. So, you see, gentlemen, she continued, shooting me would be pointless. Everything you've said tonight is already in the hands of authorities in 12 countries. The only question is whether you want to add murder to your charges. Moreau's face was purple with rage. You clever little... That's when I kicked open the access panel and dove into the private box. 30 years of breaking up high school fights having taught me the value of surprise attacks. I landed on Moreau's back, sending his gun flying across the box as the other men scrambled for cover. Emily immediately grabbed a heavy crystal ashtray and began defending herself against one of the other men while I wrestled with Moreau. For a 70-year-old European Parliament member, he was surprisingly strong. But for a 62-year-old Ohio teacher who'd spent 3 decades dealing with difficult teenagers, he was just another bully who needed to learn some manners. I had him in a headlock when Austrian police burst through the main door of the box. Everybody freeze! Police! Moreau went limp in my arms as Emily stood over one of the other men, crystal ashtray raised like a weapon, her eyes blazing with triumph. Inspector Muller, she said calmly, I believe these gentlemen are ready to discuss plea bargains now. As the police handcuffed the 4 men, Emily walked over to me with that same fearless smile. Mom, what took you so long? Traffic, I said, hugging her tighter than I'd ever hugged anyone in my life, because at that moment, I realized that my daughter had just accomplished something extraordinary. She hadn't just exposed a criminal network. She'd forced the people running it to confess everything on tape in front of multiple law enforcement agencies. The war we'd started in France was finally over, and we'd won. But as they led Moreau away, he looked back at Emily with pure hatred and said something that chilled me to the bone. This is bigger than you know, girl. Bigger than any of you know. Something told me that while we'd won this battle, the real war was just beginning. 6 months later, 6 months. I was sitting in federal court in Washington, D.C., watching my daughter testify before a joint congressional committee about international human trafficking networks. Emily had traded her gray dress for a navy blue suit that made her look every inch the formidable woman she'd become. Senator Williams, Emily was saying in response to a question, the evidence we gathered indicates this network operated for at least 40 years, with connections to banking institutions, government officials, and judicial systems in 14 countries. I watched from the gallery, proud beyond words, but also exhausted from the months of depositions, trials, and international coordination that had followed the Vienna operation. The final count was staggering. 847 women rescued from facilities across Europe, 156 arrests including government officials and bank executives, and financial assets worth over 2.3 billion euros seized and redistributed to victims and their families. Mrs. Patterson, Senator Williams continued, can you tell the committee how you managed to maintain hope during your 3 years of captivity? Emily looked directly at me before answering. Senator, I maintained hope because I knew my mother would never stop looking for me, and I knew that if I could gather enough evidence, together we could make sure no other woman would have to endure what I endured. After the hearing, Emily and I walked out of the Capitol building together. The media attention had been intense, but we'd learned to navigate it with the same determination we'd used to navigate everything else. So, Emily said as we settled into our rental car, what's next for the Patterson investigation team? I laughed. Investigation team? Sweetheart, I think we've done enough investigating for one lifetime. Actually, Mom, I got a call yesterday from a woman in Australia. Her daughter married into a wealthy family there and hasn't been heard from in 2 years. I looked at my daughter, seeing the familiar determination in her eyes. Emily. And there was another call from a family in Brazil. Similar situation. Emily, we can't save everyone. Maybe not everyone, but we could save some. and we're really good at this. I thought about the past year, about how we'd gone from being victims to being the people other families called when they needed help. Inspector Rousseau had offered us both consulting positions with Interpol. The FBI wanted Emily to head up their new human trafficking task force. We'd received job offers from organizations around the world. "There's something I need to tell you," I said finally. "I've been thinking about Inspector Rousseau's offer. The Interpol position? The joint position. They want us to work together, investigating international trafficking networks full-time." Emily was quiet for a moment. "What do you think?" "I think your father always said I was wasted as a high school teacher, that I had the instincts of a detective, but never had the opportunity to use them. And now you do. Now we do." Emily smiled. "So we're really going to do this? Become professional crime fighters? We're going to become professional justice fighters. There's a difference." 3 weeks later, we were on a plane to Geneva, where Interpol had established a new international human trafficking investigation unit. Emily would head up field operations while I coordinated financial analysis and multi-jurisdictional cooperation. As we flew over the Atlantic, I reflected on how much our lives had changed since that day I'd found Emily on her knees, scrubbing floors in a French chateau. We'd gone from being isolated victims to being part of an international network dedicated to protecting vulnerable women. "Mom," Emily said, looking up from the case file she was reviewing, "do you ever regret not just taking me home to Ohio when we had the chance?" I looked at her, confident, fierce, determined to fight for women who couldn't fight for themselves, and felt that familiar surge of pride. "Emily, taking you home to safety was never really an option. Not when we knew there were dozens of other women still trapped. Not when we had the power to do something about it. Even if it meant putting ourselves in danger? Especially because it meant putting ourselves in danger. Someone has to stand up to people who profit from human suffering. Someone has to make sure that when families like the Dubois think they can destroy lives without consequences, they're wrong." Emily nodded, understanding what I meant. "Someone has to make sure that when girls get into trouble, their mothers come looking for them." Exactly. As we began our descent into Geneva, I realized that the woman who had originally gotten on that plane to France, the worried mother desperate to reconnect with her daughter, was gone. In her place was someone stronger, more determined, and infinitely more dangerous to people who thought they could abuse women with impunity. Henri Dubois had made a fatal mistake when he decided to target Emily Patterson. He'd assumed he was dealing with an isolated young woman with no resources and no support system. He'd had no idea that attacking Emily meant going to war with Margaret Patterson, and Margaret Patterson, it turned out, was much better at war than anyone had anticipated. The final score: 847 women rescued, criminal networks in 14 countries dismantled, and 2 women from Ohio who'd learned that sometimes the best way to heal from trauma is to make sure it never happens to anyone else. Not bad for a retired high school teacher and her daughter who just wanted to have dinner together in France. As for Henri and Marguerite Dubois, they were serving life sentences in French prison, where I'm told they'd developed a sudden appreciation for manual labor and taking orders from people they considered beneath them. Funny how that worked out. And Jean-Claude Moreau, the European Parliament member who'd thought he was untouchable? He was spending his remaining years in a maximum security facility in Austria, sharing a cell with someone who had very strong opinions about men who hurt women. Some people might call that poetic justice. I just called it a good start. Because the truth was, even though we'd won this war, there would always be more Henri Dubois out there, more Catherine Beaumonts, more powerful men who thought money and influence gave them the right to destroy women's lives. But now there were also more Emily Pattersons and Margaret Pattersons. Women who understood that the best way to fight monsters was to become something they'd never expected. Ordinary mothers and daughters who refused to stay ordinary when the people they loved were threatened. And that, I'd learned, was the most dangerous thing you could be. The war was over. Justice had been served. And the Patterson family was ready for whatever came next. Bring it on. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.